Hello, I'm Zena Khemiri Kolshorn, and my age today is 86 years old, but I was born in 1931, and I'd just like to give you a little ambience of who I am and where I came from. I was born in Germany, in Hamburg, which is a big multi-million city up in the north. And my parents, you'll be quite interested to know, my mother was very English. And my father came from North Africa, Tunisia. He was Tunisian, an Arab, and therefore he was born into a Muslim family and of course was raised to believe in Muhammad and Muslim. And he had a very curious mind, my father, and I don't know how, but even as a young man in Tunisia, he somehow got a hold of the Quran, of course, and the Bible. And he was obsessed by the thought of death. What does death mean? His mother had died when he was a young boy, and when he finally could understand things more, and people told him, well, she died, she's dead. What is death? Asked my father. And they couldn't quite explain it to him. And then as he grew up and got a hold of the Bible, he read the words of Isha, Yeshua, when he said, "He that believeth in me shall never see death." And my father was elated to think that somebody as noble as Isha, this Yeshua of Nazareth, could say he will never see death if he believes in me. And he wanted that. So it changed his thinking completely. And I'm afraid, being a Muslim, he felt he had to flee his Tunisian country, which is in the north of Africa, through the country of Morocco and into the country east of Africa, Morocco. And there he went to a Christian mission and talked to people about Jesus, Yeshua's words, and death and life, and was delighted to hear that they believed in life to come and a new world. And there, strangely enough, he met this young lady from England, my mother-to-be. And after some time, with great difficulties, this Tunisian Arab, one-time Muslim, become a follower of Yeshua, married my mother, my English mother. Let me explain. Yeshua is the Hebrew name for Jesus, as we say in English, Jesus, the Messiah. So they were both of the same mind and the same hope, and after a few years got married in Cairo. And then I was born when they lived in Germany. My father was a linguist, which means that he spoke languages, 5 languages, and in such a way that he could teach at the Hamburg University and had a wonderful job in Germany. My mother was very English and didn't exactly relish living in Germany, but they lived there. And then, 1933, a big event happened, and it's important for me to explain it to you so that you understand the happenings that brought about World War II and by that I mean every country in the world was involved in this major war. So let me go back a moment to understand the ambience, the culture, the feelings of the people in those days. 1928, that was way before I was born, the Great Depression occurred. And I'd like to emphasize the word great, because we have had a depression. We've had two depressions in my lifetime, in the 1990s. We had a depression, and I would call it was a major depression. And then we had another depression in 2008, didn't we? And that was, I would say, a mild depression compared to the moderate depression in 1980 and compared to the major depression of 1928, which affected almost the whole world. I remember reading, I wasn't born yet, but I remember reading in 1928, people didn't have work, they didn't have money, they didn't have food, they were in bad shape. And things got so bad that in order to buy one loaf of bread, they had to have a wheelbarrow full of paper money for one loaf of bread. Money became worthless, and bread was much needed. Anyway, starvation, no work, hopelessness, anguish, fear was the makeup of the people in 1928. And I was born in 1931, and in 1933, Adolf Hitler, a man in Germany, became the leader, the Führer, what we would call the president of Germany. And he promised them work. Oh, the people were delighted to hear that. He promised them a good education, the best schools, and he promised them health care. And do you know, he kept his promise. The people thought, what? He's going to give us those things. That's what we need. We need work, we need food, we need education, and get us out of this awful, depressing, hopeless mess of Germany. And the whole world was in a great mess at that time. So the people did believe him. Not only did he promise them those things, he said, I'm going to build a 1,000-year kingdom that's going to be greater than the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire only lasted 700 years. And I'd like to ask you, how old is America? 200 years? Oh, we're very young, aren't we? We've got a lot to learn yet. Well, this man, with all his enthusiasm and wanting to give them what they needed, also said he's going to build a new empire, a 1,000-year empire. Not only that, but they didn't need the Bible and a God. He would be their Führer. Führer is the German word for leader. And these German people, most of them, began to believe in him. Yes, we do need a new leader. And never mind this book that talks about an invisible God. We have a visible Führer. And they liked the idea of building a 1,000-year Germanic kingdom, Reich. You remember the word Reich, the German Reich? The German word Reich means kingdom, R-E-I-C-H. So if I refer to Reich, it refers to the coming German kingdom. Well, the German people on the whole loved that idea, and they were happy to see a Führer visibly in front of them with all the other good promises. Well, let me get into the history quickly, because Adolf Hitler gave them the best education. In a very short time, Germany had the best schools in the world. Even my mother, who was very English and didn't really like this German culture that was developing and starting, and hoped that they would leave Germany sometime, even my mother recognized the good teaching that was going on in the schools in her 4 children. I was one of them. I was only young when I went to school, and my sister was 2 years younger, and then my 2 brothers a little older. We were all under 10 years old when we started school, but we started reading and writing and learning many things. My mother was impressed with the teachers, and she taught us, now you respect your teacher. She's doing a wonderful job teaching you, and always do your homework. My mother had to be almost stricter than the teacher who said, don't you come to school unless you've done your homework. We learned, and we obeyed, and we learned hard. My mother recognized the goodness of these German schools. Not only that, in no time, Adolf Hitler gave them work, and I saw a movie of it. Hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know, I didn't count them. Hundreds and hundreds of men marching along, not like soldiers, but marching along with not guns over their shoulders, but spades. And they got to the countryside, and there they were instructed to dig, and it was the beginning of the Autobahn. Do you know that word, Autobahn? Well, in English it's the highway and the transportation between cities. They didn't have that before. Well, they didn't have cars either. Well, they were just starting cars, but not like today. So Germany started the highway. And would you believe it? The rest of the world, the richer countries like America, 20 years after Germany, started having highways. You take it for granted today. We all have highways. They weren't always there. The Germans started it, and every German that had no work had work. So what else did Hitler promise? Work, schools, and health care. That's right. We all paid income tax, of course, and there was only one insurance company, not the dozen insurance companies that America has today, competing with one another. No, we paid our income tax, and this one insurance company paid for all our needs in the hospitals, the doctor's office, medicines. And so Germany, the Germans began to breathe and be happy. They were working toward the 1,000-year Germanic Reich. And just try and think, those who are listening to me, if we had a president today who could truly end unemployment and give everybody a job, if we had a president today who initiated a health care that would look after everybody, dental work, hospital work, pharmacy, everything. And what was the third thing? Health care, schooling, and work. Well, those are the three things. If we had a president today who could truly give us those things, which, and I say it with a serious, painful face, Adolf Hitler gave the Germans. Now, of course, there were many Germans that didn't believe him, including my parents. They were quite astute in history and in politics, and they saw the direction in which Germany was going, and they did not want anything to do with those politics and that 1,000-year kingdom to come and away with the God of the Bible. And for a long time they began to plan to leave Germany. But we'll get to that in a moment. I'll just weave in the fact that there were many Germans, not most of them, no. Most of them followed Hitler, but there were some who said, no, he's building a new kingdom. I believe in the kingdom of Jesus Christ that is going to come one day with true righteousness and true peace and true integrity. And especially my father, who wanted to follow this Isha or Yeshua or Jesus and follow him through death unto this new life. Well, Hitler's philosophy had nothing to do with that coming kingdom of Yeshua. And equally, there were some Germans who couldn't give Adolf Hitler their love and faith and following. And I'll only mention one name, but there were many names. But this man deserves to be remembered, and his name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm speaking German. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he was a man of the Word of God and believed in the coming, not 1,000-year Reich, but it was a million everlasting Reich under Yeshua. And he talked about it very openly. He even became a teacher in the churches. Well, to make a long story short, Adolf Hitler soon had him in one of his camps and had him hanged to death. So there were many Germans like that, and other people too. Let me continue with history. This was all happening in a positive way, and I'd just like to leave with you the fact that you can understand why so many Germans believed in the Führer, were grateful for work, for health care, for this good education. They wanted more and more. I'm going to go over history very quickly and come to 1939. Remember, Hitler came to power in 1933. I came to life in 1931. And now it's 1939. And suddenly, over the radio, we didn't have television in those days, over the radio came the news that war had broken out. The Second World War. And that was Germany leading the war. And my mother was English. And she had brothers in England. And she was living in Germany. And oh, how my parents wanted to leave Germany. In fact, my father already had applied for a job in Lebanon Lebanon was a safe country. At that time, Lebanon was the leading country in the Near East. And he applied for a job at the Beirut University as a linguist, and he was accepted. They wanted him. But here we were in Germany, and here the war started. And we were too late to leave Germany. So we were caught in the war. I'm going to take a few quick steps into the war, because I'd like you to feel, not only know, but feel the war. Germany was leading it, and Germany felt she was strong enough with all her ammunition, with all her soldiers, which she had trained very well, and with all the panzers and planes that they had, planes for war. Germany was confident that she was going to win the war and hasten her 1,000-year kingdom. So here we were in Germany. We were foreigners. But the German country felt they needed my father, because they said, he's an Arab, you know. He's on our side. He hates the Jews. So that will help us, because Germany wanted to have a pure German race of people, blonde, blue-eyed people they constantly spoke about, and they didn't want another race of people to mingle with them. And they felt that Jewish people shouldn't be. And they felt that my father would be on their side because he was an Arab. So we weren't put in camps or anything. We just had to report to the police every week to show that we were there and hadn't escaped or hidden somewhere. Let me quickly get into the war that I would like you to feel. The first 2 years of the war, 1939, 1940, 1941, Germany was on the rise. Almost every country in Europe was under German occupation, from Poland, Romania, Hungary, Greece. Italy even wanted to be on Germany's side and help them in the war. And here they came to France, and France quickly said, it's all right, we'll be on your side, just don't start any war in us. Norway and Sweden were under German occupation. Denmark, Belgrade, all the countries in Europe were under German domination. And here Germany was in France, and France is only 10 or 15 miles away from Great Britain, my mother's country. And I read somewhere, prove it true or untrue, just as you wish. I couldn't prove everything, but I did read that Hitler thought, good, next country is Great Britain, and she will be ours. And I read that Adolf Hitler was much in touch with spirits and cults, and that a spirit very plainly said to Adolf Hitler, leave Great Britain now. She will be the feather in your crown. She will be the most worthwhile conquest. For now, turn east, Germany. Turn over to Russia. Russia had become Germany's enemy now. And so, Adolf Hitler's soldiers did not invade Great Britain, but they turned to Russia, and the awful war in the East began. 2 years later, Great Britain had managed to build airplanes for war, bombs for war, train her soldiers for war, and all that is needed for war these 2 years. And when Germany finally wanted to go toward Britain, Britain was strong. And in the meantime, 1941, America joined in the war because of the awful Pearl Harbor incident when the Japanese came and bombed American ships. So America was in the war. I'm going to take some giant steps forward. There was a turning point in the war. It wasn't Germany conquering the strongest one. No, it was World War II, 50-50. And the other side slowly became stronger. We, as a family in Hamburg, began to feel and experience the fear, the horrors of war. British planes came over every third or fourth or fifth night, or maybe 2 or 3 times a week, not every night, but 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, and dropped bombs on Hamburg. And in a very short time, my eyes only saw rubble, rubble, rubble. Houses destroyed. Train lines destroyed. We didn't travel by car. Cars came after the war, that everybody seemed to have a car. No, Germany had transportation, very good transportation. But they needed lines, and these lines were interrupted. Train lines or city lines. Food became more scarce because Germany couldn't loot all the other countries and send it to Germany, all the food. And Germany certainly couldn't import the food from South America, which she used to do, coffee and fruit from South America and America. No, and Germans love coffee, so they had to invent some substitute kind of coffee for the Germans. What I'd like to try to say is food became scarce, and the last 2 years of the war, we were hungry all the time. Not starving, and please understand, starving is something completely different. You starve after 30 days or so with no food. Hungry, you can be hungry in the evening if you didn't have breakfast and lunch. You'd be hungry by the evening. Well, we were hungry all day long because every meal was only a small amount. No fat people. Everybody was healthy and energetic with just a little food. And at night, The British always came at night to bomb the city. Let me explain to you, Hamburg was a huge city, multi-million population, situated on a river, and this river went up to the North Sea. So it was an ideal place for ships to be built. Ammunition. It was a great industrial city. And the British wanted to put an end to building more ships and building more ammunition. And so they came and bombed the city. 1943 was a very important time. Books have been written about Hamburg in 1943, 2 years before the war ended. Keep that in mind. But 1943, the British came, the bombers came during the day for once and dropped leaflets, little white leaflets, the half size of 3 inches by 5 inches, a little leaflet. And they dropped them by the thousands, by the millions, over the whole city of Hamburg. And you could see them fluttering onto the ground, and the streets and houses and balconies were full of these little papers. Well, of course, we weren't allowed to pick them up, and everybody was watching from their apartments to see these leaflets. We children went out and pretended to be playing and crawling on the ground and so on. And I very cleverly, I thought, managed to hide one of the leaflets in my clothing, but I kept on crawling around as if I was playing, because all the people were watching out of the window, and they knew, don't you dare pick them up. That was dropped by the enemy, and who wants to read propaganda from England? A good German would never read anything from England. So after a little while we ran inside and showed the little leaflet to my mother, and here it was written in German. Hamburg is going to be a battlefield tonight. Women and children, get out. Well, my mother and father believed it. And when evening came, we knew that the British would always bomb during the night, because during the night it was dark and the Germans couldn't see the planes, and then they couldn't shoot them down. But they would send searchlights up into the sky, and if they could find a plane, another searchlight would come, and another searchlight would come, and keep the plane in the searchlight so that the Germans could shoot it down. So we went on a picnic that evening, and I shall never forget it. We took the train. We didn't have cars. We took the train and took it to the suburbs of Hamburg as far as the train would go. And the train was chock-a-block full. All the women were allowed to sit and occupy the seats with children and bags on their laps. Children weren't allowed to sit. That was not polite. And men always stood. And here I was 10, 11 years old. I was squeezed between these men, and they were much taller than I was, but we were squeezed into this train. As many as possible got on the train and took it out as far as it would go, and nobody dared talk and ask the other one, "What are you doing on the train going out of Hamburg? Aren't you going to work tomorrow morning?" And the silence was terrible. But They all had read these notices and were trying to get out of the battlefield of Hamburg. Well, we got as far as the train would go, and we went into the woods. By now it was nighttime, dark, and very soon we looked far away toward Hamburg, and we saw the searchlights. In a little while we saw flames of fire going up. The battle had started. The morning came, and just by instinct, all you wanted to do was go home. But we didn't know whether we had a home. And we saw very shortly, there are no trains. The train lines have been bombed. Trains have been bombed. And you're going into a bombed city. Hamburg was on fire. And this was only the first night. There were 3 nights of bombing. And Hamburg went up in flames. And according to the books that have been written, there's never been a fire like that in the whole world. It was so intensive the 3rd night that the suction of the fire sucked up trees, roots and all, as if a tree were a mere match, and trees burnt. There were German people who did not leave Hamburg, and when the air raid came, they would all rush down to the basement, and every basement in Germany was reinforced to withstand a bomb. German buildings were always 5 or 6 stories high, and a bomb could only explode 3 or 4 stories, but never really get to the bottom. But these Germans were in the basement. They knew by morning that the raid must be over. Planes only have so much gasoline, and they knew they couldn't be there still. And they would try and get up the steps and go out. And in certain parts of Hamburg, the current from the fire was so strong that it just sucked up people and burnt them. So our family was trying to walk toward Hamburg and hope that our apartment building was still standing. Let me tell you quickly, it was standing. We didn't know that, but we did know afterwards that our apartment building was close to a hospital, and hospitals always had red lights on the roof to denote that they were hospitals. And the British took note of that and did not drop bombs near that, knowing that that would be community. They were after the ammunition factories and the shipbuilding factories. So the bombs were a different part of Hamburg. Our part was relatively all right. Not completely, but relatively all right. But we didn't know that. And we couldn't take a train home, 50 miles, you can't walk that. And as we got closer, the air was filled with the smoke and the dust from debris. Remember when you saw the Twin Towers go down? The air was very dusty, and that was only 2 buildings, but it was very dusty, and you had to put something in front of your nose so that you didn't breathe in the dust. Well, we didn't want to breathe in the dust that we were breathing in, and in those days, remember this is 1940s, we didn't have paper towels or plastic. No, that was invented right afterwards for us. All we had was real handkerchiefs, and everybody always carried a handkerchief. So we got out our handkerchief and started walking to breathe relatively clean air. And in a very short time we saw we'll never get home. And Hitler did read the notice and did believe and did see and did hear the news that Hamburg had been attacked. And he sent his soldiers, many soldiers, with trucks to go around Hamburg and pick up people who were trying to get back into the city. So we were put on a truck with many, many other Germans and were driven south. Hamburg was north. We were driven south. And after 2 hours or whatever, we would stop in a certain village, and here there were people standing in the streets with sandwiches to give us. Yes, they were right. We didn't have any breakfast. We didn't pack up food for a whole 3 days, and all the other people too. And the Germans were looking after their German people, and they were told, these terrible British have done something terrible. Look after your German people, feed them on the way. And when we were down south even further, we were all put in a school. Schools are big buildings, and then they took names to find out whether we were together. Sometimes families got lost on the way and were not together. We were all together, my family, my mother, my father, my 2 brothers and my sister and myself. We were a family of 6 together, and my mother and father had to give name and address, and then they would find out whether our house was still standing or not. But to their shock, the people who wrote down my mother and father's names saw that we were not German. What to do with us? And they decided to put us in a Nazi family, so that the Nazi family could keep an ear on my mother and father and what they might be saying. Nazi. Let me quickly interject this, in case I forget. What does Nazi mean? N-A-Z-I, Nazi. Well, it comes from a very long word. In the German language, you don't separate words. You have long words. And this word was Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. One word. I'm going to say it again. Listen. Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Do you see the first 2 syllables, Nazi? Well, they took those, shortened it to N-A-Z-I, and we all referred to them as Nazis. So we were booked into a Nazi family. Well, we were just children. I was 11 or so. My brothers were 12 and a half and 14, and my sister was younger than I was. We thought, wonderful, no school, holiday. We had very little idea of the horrors of politics and war. We just thought, no school, we'll have a good time. In time, my father did get into Hamburg. A few weeks, 2 months, I don't know. And he came back with the news, our apartment is all right. Shops are functioning, school has started again, and we can even take the trains and so on. Much had been destroyed. I don't know the percentage, but so much had been destroyed. But I'll tell you, 35,000 German hamburgers died in 3 nights. we, as a foreign family, went back to Hamburg in our apartment. We started going back to school again. Shops that were not destroyed had food again, and we continued to live. I would just like to give you an overview of life in Hamburg during World War II. Cold, hungry, fear, bombs, rubble and ruin around us, death. War was horrible. And I use that word to emphasize the word horror. There's one big thing I didn't mention. When the war started, the moment the war started, Hitler gave the orders that all Jews were to wear a yellow star. And in that yellow star was written the word Jude, which means Jew. In German it's Jude, because you came from the Judah tribe of Israel. Jude. And they weren't allowed to hide that star. It was about 4 inches big. You couldn't hide it under the lapel of the coat, of the coat. It had to be visible. Some shops even had signs, Juden verboten. We won't serve Jews. If a Jew was standing in line to get onto the tram or the bus or the train, whatever, and it was rush hour, there would be many, many people, then the Jew was made to go out and get to the end of the line. We had a few Jewish boys and girls going to school, and we had a neighbor, I remember him, and he wore his star. And then 2 or 3 years into the war, I forget, he suddenly wasn't there anymore. And even though we were just children, we knew, don't ask about him. Don't ask the teacher, where is so-and-so? Is he sick? Which you did if somebody else was not in school that day. Oh, is she sick? Is he sick? But you didn't ask anything about the Jew. And then, within 2 years or so, there were no more yellow stars. Jewish shops were owned by Germans. Apartments were left empty. Jews disappeared, and we were taught not to talk about it or ask questions. I found out later. I just want to leave you with the overview of the horrors of war. I'll come to the end now. The war did end. The Germans were defeated. The Germans who had occupied all of Europe were slowly driven out of those countries, back into small Germany, and Russia came in from the east and took over half of Germany. The Americans came from the south through Italy and took the south of Germany, and Great Britain came from the west and came to Hamburg and that northwest part of Germany. The war was over. Germany lost. Hitler committed suicide, and so did all the ranking Nazis, including one family. I'll mention his name because I remember the children. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the propagandist who said, if you tell the Germans a lie often enough, they will believe it. And he filled the German people with lies, and they believed it. The war ended. Hitler committed suicide. Dr. Goebbels and a very beautiful wife, and I think it was 5 or 7 children, I'm not sure, beautiful children. And I used to see their pictures in the paper and think, what a lovely family. And do you know that the parents, Dr. Joseph Goebbels and the wife, had to give poison pills to their own children and let them go to sleep forever. A lot of suicides. And then we had new soldiers marching in Hamburg. New uniforms, not the German silvery uniforms. And they always were spotless. Germans dressed well. No, these were British soldiers. And a few days after the war, the British discovered concentration camps. And they were shocked. And they took pictures, big pictures, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, big pictures, and put them in public on the advertising boards where you advertised a new book, a new film, or new this or that or the other. The British said, don't advertise anything, fill it with the concentration camp people, with their frightened eyes, their haggard, emaciated, thin bodies, their raggedy, striped, pajama-like suits that they wore, and just fill Hamburg with a concentration camp people. And underneath it, Montgomery, the British Field Marshal, had printed in German, "This is what you Germans have done." And then people couldn't help seeing it. It was outside a store, on every side, corner of the streets and so on. You couldn't help seeing it. And the German people looked at it, and the English soldiers observed them and reported to Montgomery, whoever was in charge of Hamburg. German people don't believe it. They say, you, the British people, have done these camps, and now you're trying to blame it on the Germans, but they don't believe it. And Montgomery believed what the soldiers were reporting, and he gave the order the very next morning. He said, take as many trucks as you can and pick up German men. No excuses given. Pick up German men, not old people and not children and not women. Pick up men, put them in the trucks, take them to the concentration camps, drive into them, make them get out of the trucks, make them walk amongst the survivors who were full of fear, wondering what's happening now. Last week the German soldiers and the guards suddenly left, and they were alone and no food. And then 2 days later, British soldiers came. What's happening? They didn't know the news. And now, German people coming and talking to us. And the British soldiers said, and go into the huts. Some huts with 50 inmates, maybe, I don't know how many, but they always had 3 stories of beds. One bed on top of the other. And when you're in fear, when you are dying of hunger, your body begins to work on its own, whether you are sick or whether you are excrementing. And there was nothing to clean it up. It would go in the mattress. It would leak through, maybe drip onto the next mattress, I don't know. But the smell in the huts of these poor concentration camp survivors, the smell was terrible. Make the German people go in. Let them talk to the inmates here and there. Then take them back to Hamburg and tell them, you tell your hamburgers what you saw. I think I've said enough. Life, death, hunger, sickness, bombing, rubble, no school, yes school, no school, yes school. Yes, we children were sometimes quite happy when the British bombers were over Hamburg after 2 a.m. And we used to watch the time. Keep on bombing, we said. We were just children. Keep on staying, because if you stay till after 2, we don't have to go to school. So we had school, no school. I think I'm going to leave you with that. Just to give you a few headings. Fear, death, hunger, bombs, ruin, hopelessness, war. And now I was 14 years old, growing up. How do you feel, 14-year-older, listening to me? Are you looking forward to growing up and being on your own? I had no hopes for any future. I was a hopeless, fearful, disappointed, frightened, finished person. But one day I came home from school, and here was an English soldier, an officer, in our apartment. And my mother said, Zena, that's my name, remember, Zena? Zena, I want to introduce my brother to you. What? This is your uncle. He's come to take us to England. Yes, I think I took a deep breath and thought, things may change. And then I would like to come back again and tell you of hope that came into my life after 2 years in England. Hope. In the first place, all our English relatives came together and got us a home. We had a home. Then they put us in schools, and I, 14.5 years old, was put in an English boarding school for young ladies. My word, what a change. I could tell you a lot about the difference of these English girls that taught me and never criticized me, because my English wasn't perfect. I was speaking German, of course, but my English I was still learning, but they never criticized me for that. Not one girl said, "Oh, you were in Germany? Well, my uncle died, you know." No, nothing. They didn't talk about Germany. They didn't talk about Hitler. They just made me look forward to learning, and the greatest thing that happened in those 2 years of boarding school was, of course, I had to learn Shakespeare, which you couldn't learn in Germany. Shakespeare, no. They had their own Goethe and weiter und so weiter, but not Shakespeare. And history, of course, I learned. And of all things, the Bible. Never read the Bible. Forbidden in Germany. But I had to learn a certain part of the Bible in order to answer questions so that I would pass my exam and have my English school certificate. Well, I was far behind in many of the subjects that I had to learn. So when it came to vacation time, I would take my books home with me. All the other English girls, there's a slam their desk down on their books and glad to finish with books. And I secretly took my books home and continued to learn. And here, there was this one day where I decided to read the Bible. My sister was in the room. My mother was doing her knitting. We always did everything together in the sitting room. And I did my reading. Didn't tell them it was homework or schoolwork or anything. I just did my reading. But at this point, I was reading about this noble man, Yeshua, Jesus, Isha. He was talking about his coming kingdom. And as I read, I, as it were, saw him walking in front of me, as if he were walking on white clouds and putting white clouds over all the rubble and ruin and concentration camps and death and hunger and cold and fear, putting a white cloud over it and walking with his back to me toward his coming kingdom, in which he would be the King of Kings, the Prince of Righteousness, the man of peace. the co-creator with God, and he walked and talked as I had never seen anyone on earth talking. And I opened my eyes to him, as it were, and after a long time said, it's him I want to follow. It's his new world I want to live in. I believe in this man, God, Yeshua, and his kingdom. The moment came where I talked to him and committed myself to him and his way of life and his coming kingdom. And something in me changed completely. I realized later from reading his word that what he did was seal me with his spirit. Something inside of me changed completely. And I could say with childish words, I belong to him, and he belongs to me. From then on, my life focused on his kingdom. Oh, I know we're living in this world today. Oh, I've forgotten for a moment I was back in World War II. But no, it is 2017, isn't it? So we're a little closer to his kingdom. And all I can say is I'm looking forward to it. And maybe, yes, I do have white hair. I used to have close to black hair. But I'm getting older. But I will be in a young, new body. Sooner than you probably, because all of you listening to me might be much younger than I am. But you'll get older too. But I'm looking forward to my new body. And all I can say is, all day long is, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Thank you, Lord. And yes, thank you, my Father, Lord God Almighty, for sending your Son to die for us and go to hell for us, to clean us of our human nature, sin. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Forever and ever, thank you. Thank you. And I live here in Taos County, New Mexico. And I'd like to tell you a little story that I can chuckle. It's a funny story, but I'm telling you it at a time that was really awful. But this is after the war, only a few days after the war, and we had the British soldiers walking around in Hamburg. They were the occupation troop. They were in charge of Hamburg. And here on this particular day, I was only 14 years old, and with my best friend, we were inseparable friends. She was 15, and her father was a very staunch Nazi believer. He brought his family from America all the way to Germany in order to be part of building what Hitler called the 1,000-year Germanic Reich. He wanted to be part of it. And so the war was over. Hitler had committed suicide. And my friend, in her beautiful home, had a bronze made replica of Adolf Hitler, his head. Every good Nazi family would have Adolf Hitler in their living room. And we, this quiet morning, took a bag, saw very carefully where her sister and her brother and her mother were so that they wouldn't see what we were doing. And at a particular moment, we put Hitler in the bag. And then we told the mother we were going for a walk, which we usually did. And out we went. We went to the river and looked around to see if there was anybody there. And at a particular moment, we took Hitler out of the bag and dropped him into the river. We drowned Adolf Hitler. And this family was cleaned of Nazism